On this Saturday night, reviving the mask debate. Overwhelmed hospitals and kids' ICUs over capacity, putting the pressure on politicians to restart mask mandates.
It is a triple threat, and really, truly, shame on public health and on everybody else for having waited.
And pharmacists frustrated with the fragile supply of children's pain meds. Isolating China. Canada's new Indo-Pacific trade pledges on day one of Trudeau's Southeast Asian tour.
Those opportunities are immense in trade and investment.
The U.S. Senate race now neck and neck. The Democrats' new pickup, and where the Republicans are asking Trump to stay away. And no stone left alone.
Living in France, the sacrifices that Canadians made is very, very concrete and touching.
The story of one Canadian soldier and a tiny French village.
Global National with Farah Nasser.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us. Pressure is mounting on elected officials to bring back masks in Ontario. You may remember mandates were first brought in to help overwhelmed and overloaded hospitals. Well, doctors say that exact scene is now playing out at children's hospitals. Pediatric ICUs are operating above capacity. Add to that severe staffing shortages and the so-called triple-demic of COVID-19, influenza, and RSV. As Kamil Karamali reports, with flu season just starting, physicians are sounding the alarm, saying it's just the beginning and warning of a possible ripple effect across Canada.
The crush of patients in Ontario's children's hospitals, unlike anything doctors have ever seen before.
I've never seen anything like this, and the situation is dire. I mean, where ICU beds are basically non-existent.
Government sources now say Ontario's top doctor will recommend the public begin masking on Monday. A recommendation, but not a mandate.
If there isn't a mandate, a lot of people are not going to be wearing masks. And that just makes things more dangerous for everyone.
The triple threat, COVID-19, influenza, and respiratory syncytial virus, or RSV, is overwhelming children's hospitals. The ICU at Toronto's Sick Kids is operating at more than 120% over capacity. Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario in Ottawa has been forced to open a second intensive care unit. And McMaster in Hamilton is at an occupancy rate of 140%.
So as you can tell right here, this shelf right here, it has dust on it.
Overflowing hospitals, only exacerbated by empty pharmacy shelves. Children's medicine in high demand.
The situation in hospital is destined to get worse if we don't have the supplies necessary to treat patients in a community setting. This is the most urgent situation right now. There's nothing more important than your children.
And doctors warn this is just the beginning of the triple wave.
I suspect that it will get worse before it gets better, again, which is quite concerning. I think that there are things that we can do as a society. So the big thing is reintroducing the mask mandate, especially in schools.
The Ottawa Carleton District School Board taking matters into its own hands. The new trustees will be sworn in Tuesday and will immediately vote to bring back masks in classrooms.
Shame on public health and on everybody else for having waited until it was this bad, because we knew.
They hope it'll spark other school boards to follow in their footsteps and add to the mounting pressure on the province to do the same. Kamil Karamali, Global News.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has announced $333 million in new funding aimed at deepening ties with Southeast Asia. Ottawa says it aims to shift trade away from China. Trudeau is in Cambodia, meeting with leaders of some of the world's fastest growing economies. Global's Mackenzie Gray is traveling with the Prime Minister.
It's all eyes on Asia for Justin Trudeau, with the Prime Minister touching down in Phnom Penh for the ASEAN summit. A warm welcome from the 10 member states who Trudeau is trying to court as a part of the Liberals' new Indo-Pacific plan.
This is a serious strategy that aims to deepen and strengthen our engagement in the region in the long term, putting ASEAN at the center of our strategy.
The focus of that engagement is now taking shape, with the Prime Minister announcing 9 separate initiatives, including establishing a trade hub in Southeast Asia, money for a feminist assistance policy fund, and increasing available scholarships to have South Asians study in Canada.
This means more jobs and more markets for Canadians. And it means more growth for ASEAN countries.
That's the goal of the new approach: increase trade and relations with friendly Asian countries to isolate China. With a combined GDP larger than India's and a population of over 600 million, ASEAN members are prime targets for the Liberals.
And those opportunities are immense, and trade and investment is going to be a cornerstone of our work in the Indo-Pacific strategy.
In the days ahead, the Prime Minister will shift his attention from Asia to the war in Ukraine when he meets with other world leaders at the G20 summit in Indonesia. One leader Justin Trudeau won't see: Vladimir Putin. The Russian president declined an invite to come to Indonesia and has sent his foreign minister Sergei Lavrov instead, someone Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly has no intention of meeting.
Well, we've been clear with Russia. Our goal is to isolate Russia economically, politically, and diplomatically.
But Joly did meet with the Foreign Affairs Minister from Ukraine, and sources tell Global News that the Prime Minister is expected to make announcements about additional support for Ukraine later in the trip. Farah?
Mackenzie Gray reporting from Cambodia. Thank you, Mackenzie. Shocking reports of alleged Chinese interference in Canada's 2019 elections have rocked the Trudeau government and have raised questions about whether Ottawa is doing enough to deal with the threat from Beijing. The opposition wants a parliamentary committee to investigate the allegations, first reported by Global News investigative reporter Sam Cooper. Our Ottawa Bureau Chief Mercedes Stephenson will be taking a closer look at the story and its implications for national security on this week's edition of the West Block. Mercedes.
Thanks, Farah. The threat of potential interference by Beijing in Canada isn't new, but the bombshell revelations reported last week by our Sam Cooper take things to another level. Sources say the intelligence community is extremely concerned by what China is doing and by the Liberal government's underwhelming response. In January, Prime Minister Trudeau and select members of his cabinet allegedly received a series of stunning briefings that included allegations of everything from interference in the 2019 election to concerns about the intimidation of Chinese Canadian communities and coerced extraditions to China using so-called Chinese police stations on Canadian soil. China experts we spoke to on the West Block say they aren't surprised that Beijing has been upping the ante. Canada's former ambassador to China, David Mulroney, found the recent revelations deeply troubling.
What's astonishing about this latest report is its size, ambition, and complexity. To run this through 11 different campaigns is astounding, to be able to do that and to control it. And I think we need to be taking a very deep look at what China is doing to bring a threat to our autonomy as a country, to our ability to operate independently.
National security expert Akshay Singh echoed those concerns to me, highlighting that there's a lot at stake for Canada.
I think what's new in these allegations is the depth of what's happening and the extent to which they're actually taking place in the country. I think one thing that Sam's pointed out, which I would like to make sure that I point out as well, is that it's not just about elections.
Also on the show this week, I'll speak with Veterans Affairs Minister Lawrence MacAulay, who is in the hot seat as the wait times for veterans' disability benefits continue to fail the promised standard, leaving veterans struggling. And I'll ask the minister about calls for him to resign, as well as his future.
And the process has continued to come. It's not a success, Mercedes. It's not a success, but we're on the right track. And the only time it will be a success is when we get to the national standard. And that by next summer, we expect to have that. Vitally important for veterans.
We'll have more on both of those stories this week on the West Block. Farah?
All right, Mercedes Stephenson. Thanks, Mercedes. In the U.S., control of the House and Senate is still up in the air. The House may swing back to Republican control, but the fate of the Senate is waiting on the results of a too-close-to-call race in Nevada and a runoff in Georgia. And as Jennifer Johnson reports, the man blamed for Republican losses, Donald Trump, is gearing up for his own battle against Congress.
In a critical U.S. Senate race, Arizona Democrat Mark Kelly is the projected winner, putting his party one victory away from controlling the Senate for the rest of President Joe Biden's term.
And I'm so honored that Arizona has entrusted me to represent our state in the United States Senate.
Arizona's Republican gubernatorial candidate has spread doubts about the accuracy of the vote counting. Her race is still a toss-up. Arizona's largest county, America's second largest voting jurisdiction, is now undergoing a vote audit.
We're not doing anything wrong at all. It's required under Arizona law, And this hand count audit allows us to ensure that the machines are operating correctly.
Another critical Senate race won't be determined until December 6th, when Democrat Senator Raphael Warnock faces off again against former football star Herschel Walker. The runoff was forced after neither candidate got 50% of the vote. Prominent Republicans are already campaigning with Walker.
I was built for this.
But one big-name Republican, former President Donald Trump, is being asked to stay away from the Walker campaign after several candidates Trump endorsed lost in the midterms. GOP leaders have reportedly grown tired of Trump's controversies. Trump has just filed suit against the January 6 committee, which subpoenaed him to testify about his role in the Capitol riot. Trump is keeping quiet about that investigation ahead of his own big news.
President Trump is going to announce on Tuesday that he's running for president, and it's going to be a very professional, very buttoned-up announcement.
Meanwhile, Republicans do seem poised to take over the House. Most races still being counted are leaning red.
What was our mission? To win the majority, to stop Biden's agenda, and fire Nancy Pelosi.
But really stopping Biden's agenda will require Republicans also take over the Senate. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.
Melting ice opening up new waterways and new problems in Canada's north. Coming up, the consequences of climate change when it comes to security and safety in the Arctic. Canada's northern frontier is changing fast. To say the Arctic has one of the harshest climates of anywhere in the world is nothing new, but melting glaciers and sea ice are making it even more unpredictable and dangerous. Jeff Semple recently spent time on board one of Canada's 6 new icebreakers, part of a mission to map new waterways and maintain a firm presence in the region. As he reports, communities in Canada's far north hope the new federal funding will help preserve their livelihoods.
Komoyek Mitsumo grew up on these waters off the coast of Iqaluit. His family fishes year-round, and they've seen up close how climate change is reshaping the region.
This June, it was open out there.
He says the ice is melting earlier in the year, making the river less predictable.
That's scary to hear you say that, honestly.
Very scary.
Last July, his family's boat hit a clear piece of ice.
When I hit that ice, made a hole right there, and there's a long crack. We were sticking so fast.
Incredibly, they managed to climb onto a nearby sheet of ice, where they waited, shivering for hours, until their friends came to the rescue.
We are alive. We were very lucky to survive the accident.
Across Canada's north, the melting ice is opening up new waterways to maritime traffic, from fishing boats to cruise ships, creating an urgent need to police these waters and expand search and rescue capabilities. Enter HMCS Margaret Brooke.
New course 078 in minute 35.
The Arctic vessel is the newest addition to the Royal Canadian Navy, one of what will eventually be 6 icebreakers, tasked with patrolling Canada's northern waters.
Now we realize that with the ice melting, now there's going to be more and more cargo ship going through the Northwest Passage. It's time for us to be there policing. You look outside, the water is pristine. Make sure that all environmental laws show a presence.
To patrol the Arctic, an area that covers 40% of Canada's territory, their best lifeline is local knowledge.
Steer 020. Steer 020.
Emily Joss is a member of the Sault Ste. Marie Historic Métis community, and she holds a newly created position within the Navy, Indigenous Liaison Officer.
For us, it's an incredibly important relationship.
The ship's affiliated territory is Nunatsiavut, the Inuit homeland in Labrador.
We just started our relationship building with the government in Nunatsiavut in the last 6 months, but it's already been incredibly fruitful in terms of the local knowledge of the areas that we're operating in.
Today, we turn another page and begin NORAD's next chapter.
Last summer, Ottawa announced plans to spend $40 billion over the next 20 years to beef up Canada's northern defenses, following Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Protecting the Arctic is very important. My only hope is that there are great investments in the people and the infrastructure support.
Nunavut's NDP MP says northern communities have long suffered from poor internet connectivity and a desperate lack of housing. Most of the airports in fly-in communities don't even have paved runways. Lori Idlow hopes the new funding will help to bridge the northern infrastructure gap.
These investments, I think, will largely end up going south because of who will do the contracts and the work.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
We put those concerns directly to Canada's Defence Minister.
Can you tell us anything more, anything new about how that money will be spent?
Most definitely. I was in Goose Bay earlier this summer to make sure that the members of the community there knew that that is going to be one place where we will be committing upgrades. We will continue to consult with our Indigenous partners in the north, and we want to make sure that our Indigenous partners of this country can share in the economic benefits that will unfold as a result of these investments.
For those on the front lines of climate change, a potential win-win for Arctic security and northern development. Jeff Semple, Global News, Iqaluit.
Ahead, finally, something to celebrate in Ukraine as Russians retreat from a key city. Celebrations continued for Ukrainians this weekend as Russian troops announced their withdrawal from Kherson, the regional capital President Vladimir Putin said would belong to Russia forever. But forever only lasted 8 months. Ukrainians in Odessa and across the country celebrated the victory. The defeat comes as a major blow for Russia, but Putin still continues to pose a threat. Retreating Russian troops blew up major infrastructure in Kherson. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky warned that 70% of the region remains under Russian control. The world's most elusive graffiti artist has unveiled a new mural in a small Ukrainian town scarred by war. Banksy painted a mural on a bombed-out building just outside Ukraine's capital of a young girl doing a handstand on rubble. At least one other painting looks to be in Banksy's signature style, showing a man being grappled and flipped over by a child. Locals say the artworks are a symbol of Ukraine's unity and resistance. Next, French villagers honor one of our own, the uniquely Canadian tribute, 80 years in the making. A Canadian program that connects a younger generation to this country's war heroes is expanding. A small village in northern France held its first No Stone Left Alone event this month. A Canadian soldier was honored at his gravesite in Normandy in a very Canadian way. Our Europe Bureau Chief Crystal Gamensing reports.
Across Europe, there are Commonwealth soldiers buried in scores of cemeteries, big and small. Here, in a tiny village in northern France, a uniquely Canadian tribute. Martin and Océane, two local children, learn about our Remembrance Day traditions. Frederick Russell didn't recite in Flanders Fields, but he did share the story behind Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae's powerful poem. Another story shared with these young people, that of a Canadian pilot who went missing in November 1942 after participating in Operation Rhubarb.
Il s'appelle William Donald Pagan.
William
Donald Pagan.
Donald
Pagan.
Pagan.
Voilà.
Imparting the stories of fallen Canadian soldiers is the goal of No Stone Left Alone. These French youngsters are the first in this area benefiting from the Alberta initiative. Just as many Canadian children have done, they too placed markers on the grave in tribute. A sign Flight Sergeant William Donald Pagan is not alone.
Living in France, the sacrifices that Canadians made is actually very, very concrete and touching. And living in a rural area in Normandy, I drive down the street and I see Canadian flags somewhere, or I go by and I see a cemetery and there's a Canadian inside.
Russell hopes to expand the No Stone Left Alone program so French children will understand Canada's contributions. Sergeant Pagan may be a stranger in this beautiful foreign village, but he is remembered. Flowers are regularly placed on his grave. Roland Simon says she does it because if they had a child killed in war, they would be happy if people put flowers on the grave. And then there is Michel Hébert. 80 years ago, he was in this very cemetery the day the Canadian was buried. It kind of hurts my heart, he says, because this young man came to defend us, and there he is. Hébert, along with the young children and local French leaders, all gathered to honor the fallen Canadian.
Originaire de Tottenham dans la province de Ontario, Canada, le sergent William Donald Pagam.
The deputy mayor's son is also a pilot and served in Afghanistan, and so she has taken a keen interest in Sergeant Pagam.
Il avait à peine 20 ans.
Mati Maison notes that he was barely 20 and calls what he must have seen unimaginable. The mayor says he was proud when he was asked if Touville-les-Ifs would participate in No Stone Left Alone. He called the ceremony very nice and moving.
The mayor of Touville-les-Ifs was very, very adamant at being involved. And I know the way things work around here is that the mayor is going to talk to the mayor in the village beside and say, oh, we had this organized.
The hope of a ripple of remembrance by transmitting the story of one fallen Canadian honored in a tiny French village. Crystal Gamansing, Global News, London.
And that's Global National for this Saturday night. I'm Farah Nasser. Tonight's Air Canada is the country's longest pier in White Rock, British Columbia, just outside of Vancouver. Until tomorrow, take care of yourselves and each other. Good night.